Elijah Johnson wasn't the kind of man who craved attention. In fact, he preferred to stay in the background, quietly doing what needed to be done without expecting anything in return. He lived in a small mountain town called Pine Ridge, where life moved slower and nature reigned supreme. Every morning, Elijah would lace up his sturdy boots, grab his backpack filled with essentials, and head out into the wilderness as part of his job as a park ranger. His days were spent patrolling trails, checking on hikers, and making sure everyone stayed safe. But this wasn't just a job for him, it was his calling. Growing up, Elijah had faced more than his fair share of challenges. Life hadn't always been kind to him, but instead of letting bitterness take hold, he chose to focus on helping others. Whether it was guiding lost tourists back to their cars or rescuing animals stuck in traps, Elijah found meaning in acts of kindness. On one crisp autumn morning, the air smelled fresh, like fallen leaves and pine needles. The sun peeked over, the mountains casting golden light across the landscape. As Elijah hiked along a familiar trail near Eagle's Peak, he couldn't help but feel grateful for the peace that surrounded him. It was moments like these, when the world felt still and untouched, that reminded him why he loved his work so much. But then something broke the silence. At first it was faint, a distant cry carried by the wind. Elijah stopped in his tracks, straining to listen. There it was again, louder this time. Someone was calling for help. Without hesitation, Elijah sprang into action. His training kicked in as he quickly assessed the situation. Whoever was out there needed him, and every second counted. The sound seemed to be coming from higher up the mountain, somewhere near the rocky cliffs. Elijah adjusted his gear and started climbing, moving carefully but swiftly. Each step brought new obstacles, loose rocks, jagged edges, and steep inclines, but none of it slowed him down. His mind was focused on one thing: reaching the person in trouble. As he climbed higher, the cries grew clearer, tinged with desperation. "Help! Is anyone there?" a voice called out weakly. Elijah shouted back, "I'm coming! Hold on!" Hearing his response, the voice faltered for a moment before replying, "Please hurry." With renewed determination, Elijah pushed forward. He knew how dangerous falls could be in this area. One wrong move could send someone tumbling hundreds of feet below. The thought sent a chill down his spine, but he pushed it aside. Panic wouldn't help now. Calmness and focus were key. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Elijah reached the source of the cries. Peering over the edge of a narrow ledge, he saw her, a woman clinging to the side of the cliff, her face pale with fear. She looked hurt, her leg twisted at an unnatural angle, and she was struggling to keep herself from slipping further. For a brief moment, Elijah allowed himself to take in the scene. This woman had clearly been through something terrifying, yet here she was, fighting to survive. Her courage struck him even as he realized the enormous challenge ahead. Getting her off this ledge safely wouldn't be easy, especially given the treacherous terrain. But Elijah didn't have time to dwell on the risks. He knelt down, locking eyes with the woman. "You're going to be okay," he said firmly, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "My name is Elijah. I'm here to get you out of this." The woman nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered hoarsely. Elijah wasted no time. He pulled out his first aid kit and began assessing her injuries. Broken ribs, a possible concussion, and definitely a bad sprain on her ankle. He ticked off the list mentally. Knowing they couldn't stay there long, he fashioned makeshift splints using materials from his pack and nearby branches. Then, with painstaking care, he secured her to his harness, ensuring she wouldn't slip during the descent. The journey down the mountain was grueling. Every step required precision and strength, and Elijah carried most of the woman's weight as they navigated the uneven path. Hours passed, and the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the forest floor. Despite the physical toll, Elijah refused to let fatigue slow him down. He kept talking to the woman, encouraging her, reminding her that they were almost there. By the time they finally reached the trailhead, paramedics were waiting. Elijah gently handed the woman over to their care, watching as they loaded her onto a stretcher. Exhausted but relieved, he stood back, brushing dirt and sweat from his hands. Before being taken away, the woman turned her head toward him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. Elijah smiled, shaking his head. "Just doing my job," he replied simply. Little did he know, this rescue would change both their lives forever. The woman lay on the cold, hard rock ledge, her body trembling from both pain and fear. She had always loved hiking. It was her escape from the noise of her busy life. But today, that love had turned into a nightmare. The trail had seemed easy. Enough at first, just another solo adventure in the mountains she adored. But then a misstep. One wrong placement of her foot sent her slipping down the rocky slope. Her hands clawed desperately at the loose dirt and stones, trying to stop the fall, but gravity was unforgiving. When she finally came to rest on a narrow outcrop, her body screamed in agony. Pain shot through her ribs every time she tried to breathe, and her ankle throbbed with a deep, sharp ache. She glanced down at the steep drop below her, her heart pounding as vertigo threatened to overwhelm her. Panic bubbled up inside her, but she forced herself to stay calm. Screaming wouldn't help. She needed to think. She called out weakly, her voice cracking against the vastness of the wilderness. "Help! Is anyone there?" The words echoed back at her, swallowed by the trees and rocks. For a moment, silence answered her. Tears welled up in her eyes. Was this how it ended? Alone, broken in the middle of nowhere? But then faintly she heard something, a shout. Someone was answering her. Relief flooded through her chest, but it was short-lived. Even knowing someone was coming didn't make the pain or fear disappear. Every breath felt like fire in her lungs, and every movement sent fresh waves of agony coursing through her body. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as she waited, clinging to the hope that whoever was coming would arrive soon. And then, finally, she saw him. A man appeared above her, his face etched with concern. He moved carefully, his boots scraping against the rough surface of the cliff. His dark skin glistened with sweat, and his breathing was heavy from the climb. But his eyes were steady, focused. "I'm here," he said firmly, kneeling beside her. "You're going to be okay." Those words, simple as they were, felt like a lifeline. She nodded, choking back tears. "Thank you," she managed to whisper, her voice barely audible. The man wasted no time. He opened a small bag he carried and pulled out supplies, bandages, splints, and other tools she didn't recognize. As he worked, he spoke softly, explaining what he was doing. "I'm going to check your injuries, all right? Try not to move too much." He examined her carefully, his touch gentle despite the urgency of the situation. When he pressed lightly on her ribs, she winced, biting her lip to keep from crying out. "Broken," he muttered under his breath. Then he turned his attention to her ankle, which was already swelling. "Sprained may be worse. We'll need to stabilize it before we can move." She watched him work, marveling at his calm efficiency. Who was this man? How did he know exactly what to do? Questions swirled in her mind, but she didn't have the strength to ask them. Instead, she focused on staying conscious, forcing herself to take slow, shallow breaths despite the pain. Once her injuries were stabilized as best as possible, the man looked at her again. "We need to get you off this ledge. Can you trust me?" Trust him? She barely knew him, yet here he was, risking his own safety to save hers. What choice did she have but to trust him completely? She nodded, though fear still lingered in her chest. Using ropes and straps from his pack, he secured her to his harness, double-checking each knot with meticulous care. "This might hurt a little," he warned, "but I'll do my best to keep you comfortable." True to his word, he moved slowly and deliberately as they began their descent. Each step was agonizing for her, jolting her injured body in ways she couldn't prepare for. But his voice never wavered, offering encouragement and reassurance. "We're almost there," he'd say, "or just a little farther. As they made their way down the mountain, the two of them talked, or rather, he talked and she listened. He told her about his job as a park ranger, about his love for the outdoors, and about the quiet beauty of Pine Ridge. His words painted a picture of a life far removed from the chaos of cities and boardrooms. In return, she shared fragments of her own story, how she often came to the mountains to clear her head, how she valued solitude more than anything else these days. She didn't mention her wealth or her status. Those things felt irrelevant in this moment, suspended between earth and sky, dependent entirely on the kindness of a stranger. Hours passed, though it felt like days. Finally, they reached the base of the mountain, where paramedics waited with a stretcher. As they loaded her onto it, she turned her head to look at him one last time. "I don't even know your name," she admitted, her voice weak but sincere. "Elijah," he replied with a smile. "Elijah," she repeated, committing the name to memory. "Thank you. I owe you everything." He shook his head, brushing off her gratitude. "Just doing my job," he said humbly. But as she was carried away, she couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end of their story. Something about Elijah, the quiet strength in his demeanor, the selflessness of his actions had left an indelible mark on her. Little did either of them know, their paths were destined to cross again in ways neither could have imagined. The days that followed the rescue were a blur of hospital rooms, medical tests, and painkillers. The woman lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling as doctors and nurses bustled in and out. Her body was healing, slowly, but her mind kept drifting back to the mountain. Every time she closed her eyes, she could still feel the cold rock beneath her fingers, hear the echoes of her own panicked cries for help. And then there was him, Elijah. His calm voice, his steady hands, the way he had carried her down the mountain like it was all just another day's work. She couldn't stop thinking about him. Who was this man? How could someone be so selfless, so fearless in the face of danger? Most people would have hesitated, maybe even turned away, but not Elijah. He had climbed that treacherous slope without a second thought, risking his own life to save hers. She owed him everything, yet she didn't even know where to start when it came to thanking him. Her injuries meant she was stuck in the hospital for a while longer, which gave her plenty of time to reflect. As the initial shock wore off, she began to realize just how close she had come to losing everything. If Elijah hadn't been there. She shuddered at the thought. For the first time in years, she felt truly vulnerable, and it scared her. But it also made her want to do something meaningful, to honor the second chance she'd been given. One afternoon, a nurse walked into her room holding an envelope. "This was delivered for you," the nurse said with a smile, placing it on the bedside table. The woman frowned. She wasn't expecting anything. Curious, she reached for the envelope and opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten note, simple but heartfelt. "Dear stranger, I'm glad you're safe. That's all that matters. Take care of yourself. And don't hesitate to reach out if you ever need anything. You're stronger than you think." It was signed simply, Elijah. Tears welled up in her eyes as she read the words over and over again. There was no expectation, no demand for gratitude, just pure kindness. It was exactly what she needed in that moment, and it hit her harder than she expected. But the note wasn't the only thing in the envelope. Beneath it was a check. At first glance, she thought it must be some kind of mistake. The amount written on it was staggering, far more than she ever imagined anyone would give. She stared at it, stunned, until she noticed the small note scribbled in the corner. "For your recovery, no strings attached." Her hands trembled as she held the check. This wasn't just generosity, it was overwhelming. She had money, more than most people could dream of. But this gesture wasn't about wealth, it was about connection, about humanity. Someone who barely knew her had gone out of their way to ensure she was taken care of. Determined to express her gratitude properly, she picked up her phone and dialed the number Elijah had left at the bottom of the note. After a few rings, a deep, familiar voice answered. "Hello? "It's me," she said quickly, her voice trembling slightly. "The woman from the mountain." There was a pause on the other end. "Oh, hey, how are you feeling?" I'm doing better, thanks to you," she replied. "Listen, I got your note, and the check. I can't accept it, Elijah. It's too much." Elijah chuckled softly. "You can, and you will. Consider it a gift. You've been through enough already." "But why?" she pressed, her voice breaking. "Why would you do this for someone you don't even know?" Another pause, and then Elijah spoke slowly, thoughtfully. "Because everyone deserves a helping hand now and then. What happened on that mountain, it wasn't just about saving your life. It reminded me of something important. We're all connected. Your struggles matter just like mine, just like everyone else's. So please let me help you heal." His words struck a chord deep within her. She wiped away tears, trying to compose herself. "I don't know how to thank you," she admitted finally. "You already did," Elijah said simply. "By surviving. By letting me be part of your story." They talked for a while longer, their conversation flowing easily despite the weight of the situation. Elijah told her about his life in Pine Ridge, about his love for nature and his passion for protecting it. She listened intently, fascinated by his perspective. Here was a man who lived simply, yet radiated contentment, a stark contrast to her own chaotic, high-pressure existence. Before they hung up, she asked him something bold. "Elijah, would you ever consider visiting me? Where I live, I mean. I'd love to show my appreciation in person, and maybe there's something we could do together. Something bigger than both of us." He hesitated briefly before replying. "I'll think about it," he said cautiously. "But no promises, all right?" "All right," she agreed, smiling despite herself. As she set the phone down, she felt a spark of hope ignite within her. This wasn't just about repaying Elijah for his heroism. It was about building something meaningful. Whatever came next, she knew one thing for certain. Elijah had changed her life in ways she couldn't fully understand yet, and she was determined to return the favor. Elijah wasn't sure what to expect when he finally agreed to visit. He'd thought about it long and hard after their phone call, weighing the pros and cons in his mind. On one hand, he didn't want to seem ungrateful or presumptuous. After all, he had only done his job that day on the mountain. But on the other hand, there was something about her sincerity that tugged at him. She hadn't just thanked him. She'd invited him into her world, promising no strings attached. It felt like an opportunity, not just for himself, but maybe for something greater. When the day came, Elijah boarded a train headed toward the city where she lived. The journey was long, giving him plenty of time to think. Pine Ridge was quiet and predictable, but this place, the bustling metropolis she called home, was anything but. As the train pulled into the station, Elijah stepped out into a sea of people rushing past, each absorbed in their own lives. The noise hit him first, car horns blaring, footsteps echoing on concrete, voices overlapping in a chaotic symphony. Then came the sights, the towering skyscrapers, the flashing billboards, the endless stream of life moving at breakneck speed. It was overwhelming, to say the least. She had arranged for someone to pick him up, a driver holding a sign with his name on it. Elijah climbed into the sleek black car, feeling out of place in his sturdy boots and weathered jacket. The driver made small talk as they wove through traffic, but Elijah mostly nodded politely, his eyes glued to the window. Everything here seemed so big, so fast, so different from the quiet forests and winding trails he knew so well. When they arrived at her building, Elijah's jaw nearly dropped. It wasn't just a house, it was a mansion, sprawling and modern with glass walls that reflected the sky. A woman greeted him at the door, warm and welcoming. "She's waiting for you inside," the assistant said with a smile, gesturing for him to follow. He found her sitting in a large, airy room filled with sunlight. She looked healthier than the last time he'd seen her, though traces of her ordeal still lingered in the way she moved carefully, favoring one leg slightly. Her face lit up when she saw him, Elijah, she exclaimed, rising from her chair. You made it. I did, he replied, smiling despite his nerves. Thanks for having me. They sat down together, and she poured him a cup of tea. For a while, they talked casually, catching up on everything that had happened since the rescue. She told him about her recovery process, how physical therapy was helping her regain strength and how she'd been spending more time reflecting on life. Elijah shared stories from Pine Ridge, describing the changing seasons, the wildlife, and the occasional hiker who got lost but always found their way back. As the conversation deepened, she began to open up about herself in ways she hadn't before. She spoke about her work, the projects she led, the innovations she championed, and how driven she was to make a difference in the world. But she also admitted that her success sometimes left her feeling disconnected, like she was constantly chasing something she couldn't quite reach. I've spent years building this life, she said, gesturing around the room. But that fall on the mountain, it made me realize how fragile everything is, how fleeting. I don't want to waste any more time doing things that don't matter. Elijah listened intently, nodding along. I get that, he said quietly. Out in the woods, you learn real quick what matters and what doesn't. Nature has a way of putting things in perspective. She smiled, leaning forward. That's exactly why I wanted you to come here. Your perspective, it's rare, and I think it could help me do something meaningful. Before he could ask what she meant, she stood and motioned for him to follow. They walked through the house to a massive office filled with screens, whiteboards, and stacks of papers. One wall was covered in photos and diagrams, detailing various environmental initiatives. This is my workspace, she explained. Most of my projects focus on sustainability, clean energy, conservation, reducing waste. But lately I've been thinking about how to bring these ideas closer to people, to communities that need them most. She turned to face him, her expression earnest. Elijah, I want to create something new, something that combines your knowledge of nature and community with my resources. Together we could make a real impact, protect ecosystems, educate people, give back to places like Pine Ridge. What do you think? Elijah stared at her, stunned. This was far beyond anything he'd imagined when he agreed to visit. Leading a project, working alongside someone like her? It sounded incredible, but also daunting. I'm not sure I'm the right person for that, he admitted. I'm just a park ranger. I don't know the first thing about running a big operation. You're selling yourself short, she countered firmly. You've spent years caring for the environment and helping people. That's exactly the kind of leadership we need. Besides, you won't be alone. I'll be here every step of the way. Her confidence in him was both flattering and terrifying. Could he really step into a role like this? Leave behind the simplicity of his old life for something so ambitious? He didn't have an answer right away, but one thing was clear. She believed in him, and that meant something. By the end of the day, Elijah left her home with more questions than answers. The city was still loud, still chaotic, but now it felt less alien. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a future where his skills and passions could reach farther than he ever dreamed possible. Whatever came next, he knew one thing for certain. This chance meeting on a mountainside had set something extraordinary in motion. Elijah didn't sleep much that night. Back in his small apartment in Pine Ridge, he lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying their conversation over and over in his mind. The weight of her proposal felt like a boulder resting on his chest. Leading a project? Working alongside someone with resources and influence far beyond anything he'd ever encountered? It was thrilling, yes, but also terrifying. Who was he to take on something so big? The next morning he woke up early, as usual. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, casting a soft orange glow across the horizon. He grabbed his coffee mug and stepped outside onto the porch, letting the crisp mountain air fill his lungs. This was his sanctuary, his safe haven. Here, surrounded by towering pines and the sound of birds chirping, life felt manageable. Out there, in the city she lived in, it all seemed so overwhelming. But even as he tried to push her offer aside, it lingered in the back of his mind. What if she was right? What if this was his chance to make a bigger impact? He thought about the people in Pine Ridge, the families struggling to get clean water, the kids who didn't have access to outdoor education programs, the land itself, slowly being eroded by neglect and misuse. If he could help change that, not just here but in other communities too, wouldn't it be worth stepping out of his comfort zone? Over the next few days, Elijah wrestled with the decision. He talked to a few close friends, trusted colleagues who knew him well. "It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity," one of them said. "You've got the heart for it, Elijah. Don't let fear hold you back." Another friend reminded him gently, "You're not doing this alone. She's offering to stand beside you every step of the way." Their words gave him courage, but they didn't erase his doubts completely. Finally, after much deliberation, he picked up the phone and called her. When she answered, her voice was warm and welcoming, as if she'd been expecting his call. "I've thought about it," he began, his tone hesitant but steady. "And I think I'm ready to give it a shot." There was a pause on the other end, followed by a soft laugh. "I'm glad to hear that," she replied, "because I already have some ideas brewing." A week later, Elijah found himself back in the city, sitting across from her in a conference room filled with charts, maps, and blueprints. She had assembled a team of experts, environmental scientists, engineers, community organizers, all eager to collaborate. At first, Elijah felt out of place, like an outsider looking in. These were people with degrees from prestigious universities, years of experience under their belts. What did he, a simple park ranger, bring to the table? But as the meeting progressed, he realized something. His perspective mattered. While the others spoke in technical terms about carbon footprints and renewable energy grids, Elijah focused on the human side of things. He talked about the importance of involving local communities, of teaching kids to care for the environment by showing them its beauty firsthand. He shared stories from Pine Ridge about how even small actions, like planting trees or cleaning up a riverbank, could inspire pride and ownership among residents. She watched him closely during the discussion, nodding along as he spoke. Later, when the meeting ended, she pulled him aside. "You see," she said with a smile, "this is why I wanted you here. You remind us of what really matters, the people. Without them, none of this works." Encouraged by her words, Elijah threw himself into the project. They started small, focusing on a pilot program in Pine Ridge. With her funding and connections, they installed solar panels in low-income neighborhoods, built greenhouses for schools, and organized workshops to teach sustainable farming practices. Elijah worked tirelessly, splitting his time between the city and the mountains, ensuring that every decision reflected the needs of the community. At first, progress was slow. Some locals were skeptical, unsure of outsiders coming in with grand plans. But Elijah's presence made a difference. He wasn't just another faceless figure, he was one of them. He listened to their concerns, adapted the programs to fit their realities, and celebrated their successes alongside them. Slowly but surely, trust began to grow. The turning point came when a group of high school students participated in a tree planting initiative. Many of them had never set foot in the forest before, let alone planted a tree. But as they dug holes, placed saplings in the ground, and packed soil around the roots, something shifted. One student approached Elijah afterward, dirt smeared across her hands, her eyes shining with excitement. "I didn't know I could do something like this," she said. "It feels good, like I'm making a difference." That moment stayed with Elijah long after the day ended. It reminded him why he had taken this leap of faith, to create opportunities for others, to show them that they had the power to shape their own futures. As the months passed, the project gained momentum. News of their success spread, drawing attention from neighboring towns and cities. Soon, invitations poured in from across the country, asking Elijah and his team to replicate the model elsewhere. Each new challenge brought its own hurdles, but Elijah faced them head-on, guided by the same principles that had always driven him: compassion, humility, and a deep love for the natural world. Through it all, She remained by his side, cheering him on, reminding him of his worth whenever doubt crept in. Together, they proved that two people from vastly different worlds could come together to achieve something extraordinary. And though neither of them knew exactly where this journey would lead, they were certain of one thing. They were building something that would last. A legacy rooted in hope, resilience, and the belief that everyone deserved a chance to thrive. The project grew faster than either of them had anticipated. What began as a small initiative in Pine Ridge quickly expanded into something much larger, a movement that touched lives far beyond the mountains. Elijah and the woman worked side by side, their partnership evolving into a seamless rhythm. She handled logistics, funding, and high-level planning, while Elijah focused on the ground-level work, connecting with communities, listening to their needs, and ensuring every program was rooted in practicality and respect. Elijah found himself traveling more often now, visiting towns and cities he'd never been to before. Each place had its own unique challenges. Polluted rivers in one community, deforestation threatening wildlife habitats in another, or schools lacking basic resources to teach kids about sustainability. No matter where he went, though, the response was always the same. People were eager for change. They just needed someone to show them how. One evening, after a long day of meetings in a rural town, Elijah sat alone in his hotel room, scrolling through photos from the past few months. There were pictures of children planting trees, families learning how to build rainwater collection systems, volunteers cleaning up trash along riverbanks. He smiled at the memories but also felt a pang of exhaustion. This life wasn't easy. It demanded everything he had. But it was worth it. Every smile, every thank you, every moment of progress reminded him why he kept going. Meanwhile, back in the city, she juggled her responsibilities with equal determination. Running a global company while spearheading this new initiative was no small feat, but she thrived under pressure. Still, there were moments when the weight of it all threatened to overwhelm her. Late nights at the office, endless phone calls, and the constant need to prove herself in a world dominated by men took their toll. But whenever doubt crept in, she thought of Elijah, the quiet strength he brought to every situation, the way he inspired others without even realizing it. His presence gave her purpose, reminding her why she'd chosen this path in the first place. Their bond deepened over time, not just as collaborators but as friends. They spent hours talking during car rides, flights, and late-night strategy sessions. She learned about Elijah's childhood, how he'd grown up in a rough neighborhood facing hardships that could have easily broken him. Instead, he'd channeled his pain into kindness, dedicating his life to helping others. Elijah, in turn, discovered the layers beneath her polished exterior. Beneath the suits and boardroom confidence was a woman who carried her own scars, who fought daily battles against self-doubt and imposter syndrome. "You don't give yourself enough credit," Elijah told her one evening as they sat together on a balcony overlooking the city skyline. "You've done so much good, yet you act like you're not enough." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "Funny coming from you. You do the same thing." They shared a look, both understanding what the other meant. For all their differences, they were more alike than they cared to admit. Two people driven by a desire to make the world better, yet constantly questioning whether they were doing enough. As the project gained national attention, media outlets began taking notice. Interviews, articles, and documentaries highlighted their work, shining a spotlight on the impact they were making. At first, Elijah was uncomfortable with the attention. He didn't see himself as a leader or a public figure. He was just a man trying to help. But she encouraged him to embrace it. "People need to hear your story," she said. "They need to see that anyone can make a difference no matter where they come from." He agreed reluctantly, stepping into the role of spokesperson alongside her. Together they spoke at conferences, appeared on television shows, and addressed crowds of thousands. Their message was simple yet powerful. Real change starts with people. It's about listening, learning, and working together. The response was overwhelming. Letters poured in from across the country, thank you notes, stories of inspiration, requests for guidance. Each one fueled their drive to keep pushing forward. But the journey wasn't without its challenges. Critics emerged, questioning their motives and accusing them of using the project for personal gain. Some dismissed Elijah as a pawn in her grand plan, while others labeled her as a rich outsider imposing solutions on communities she didn't understand. Both knew the criticism stung, but they refused to let it derail them. Instead, they leaned on each other, drawing strength from their shared vision. One particularly tough week after a grueling round of negative press, Elijah suggested they take a break. "We've earned it," he said firmly. "Let's go somewhere quiet just for a day or two. Clear our heads." She hesitated at first. There was always so much to do, but eventually agreed. They drove to a secluded cabin nestled deep in the woods, far from phones, emails, and deadlines. For the first time in months, they allowed themselves to breathe, to simply exist without the pressure of saving the world. They hiked, cooked meals together, and talked late into the night, sharing dreams they hadn't dared voice before. It was during one of those conversations that Elijah realized something profound. This wasn't just a professional partnership anymore. Somewhere along the way, his admiration for her had grown into something deeper. And judging by the way she looked at him, as if he were the only person in the world, it seemed she felt the same. Neither said it out loud that weekend, but the unspoken connection between them became undeniable. When they returned to their busy lives, things shifted subtly. They still worked together, still laughed and argued and dreamed big, but there was an added layer of intimacy. A glance, a touch on the shoulder, a lingering hug. It was all part of this new dynamic one neither wanted to rush or define too soon. What they did know was this: whatever came next, they would face it together. Through the highs and lows, the victories and setbacks, they had become more than partners or friends. They were a team, united by a shared mission and a bond that transcended words. And as they stood side by side, watching the sun rise over another day full of possibilities, they couldn't help but feel grateful for the mountain that brought them together, for the lives they'd touched, and for the future they were building, one step at a time. The bond between them continued to deepen, growing stronger with each passing day. It wasn't just their shared mission that kept them connected. It was the little moments in between, the quiet conversations over cups of coffee, the laughter during late-night brainstorming sessions, and the unspoken understanding when things got tough. They were two very different people from vastly different worlds, yet they complemented each other perfectly. Where one faltered, the other stepped up. Where one doubted, the other believed. Their work began to take on a life of its own. The initiative they had started in Pine Ridge had now blossomed into a nationwide movement. Communities everywhere were adopting sustainable practices inspired by their model. Schools implemented environmental education programs. Neighborhoods came together to plant trees and clean parks, and local governments reached out for guidance on eco-friendly policies. Elijah became the face of grassroots change, proof that anyone could make a difference if they cared enough. Meanwhile, she used her influence to secure funding, partnerships, and resources, ensuring their efforts reached as many people as possible. But despite the success, there were still challenges. Not everyone supported what they were doing. Some critics accused them of being idealistic dreamers. Others dismissed their methods as impractical or too ambitious. There were moments when the criticism felt overwhelming, when the weight of expectations threatened to crush them. During those times, they leaned on each other more than ever. One particularly rough week, Elijah found himself sitting alone in his office, staring at a stack of angry letters from detractors. He sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. These kinds of attacks weren't new, but they never got easier to handle. Just as he was about to call it a night, there was a soft knock on the door. She walked in, carrying 2 steaming mugs of tea. "You looked like you needed this," she said with a small smile, handing him one of the mugs. Elijah chuckled weakly. "Thanks. I think we both do." She sat down across from him, her expression thoughtful. "You know, sometimes I wonder if we're biting off more than we can chew. If maybe we should slow down before we burn out." He took a sip of tea, letting the warmth spread through him. I've thought about that too. But then I remember why we started this. To help people, to protect the planet. We can't stop now, not when we're finally seeing results. She nodded slowly, her gaze steady. You're right. We can't let fear hold us back, but we also can't forget to take care of ourselves and each other. Her words struck a chord deep within him. Over the past months, their partnership had become the foundation of everything they did. Without her support, he wouldn't have had the courage to step into such a demanding role. And without his grounded perspective, she might have lost sight of what truly mattered. They weren't just colleagues or friends anymore. They were anchors for each other, keeping each other steady in turbulent waters. As the weeks went by, their connection grew even stronger. One evening, after a long day of traveling, they found themselves walking along a quiet beach near the city. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Waves lapped gently at the shore, creating a soothing rhythm. For once, there were no deadlines, no meetings, no pressing issues to address. It was just the two of them side by side. I've been thinking, she said softly, breaking the comfortable silence, about how much has changed since that day. On the mountain, Elijah glanced at her, his brow furrowing slightly. Yeah? What about it? She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. That fall, it made me realize how fragile life is, how quickly everything can change. And meeting you, it reminded me of what's important, helping others, making a difference, living with purpose. She paused, looking out at the horizon. But it also gave me something else, something I didn't expect. What's that? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Hope, she replied, turning to meet his eyes. And maybe something more. Elijah felt his heart skip a beat. He'd wondered for months if what he felt for her was mutual, if the spark he sensed was real. Now, standing here under the fading light of the sunset, he knew the answer. Slowly he reached for her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers. Neither spoke. Words weren't necessary. In that moment, everything clicked into place. From that point on, their relationship shifted. It wasn't just professional or friendly anymore, it was personal. They began spending more time together outside of work, exploring new places, sharing meals, and talking about their dreams for the future. Yet, remarkably, nothing about their dynamic changed. If anything, it strengthened. Their love for each other only fueled their passion for the work they were doing. One weekend, they decided to revisit Pine Ridge together. It had been months since either of them had spent significant time there, and they wanted to check in on the progress of the projects they'd launched. As they drove through the winding roads leading to the town, Elijah couldn't help but feel nostalgic. This was where it all began, for both the initiative and their journey together. When they arrived, they were greeted warmly by the locals. Kids ran up to Elijah, hugging him and excitedly showing off the gardens they'd planted. Families thanked them for the solar panels that had brought light to their homes. Even the skeptics who had once doubted their intentions now expressed gratitude. Seeing the tangible impact of their efforts filled them with pride and renewed determination. That evening, they climbed to the top of Eagle's Peak, the same spot where Elijah had rescued her months earlier. The view was breathtaking, a sea of trees stretching endlessly toward the horizon, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. They stood there in silence for a while, simply taking it all in. Finally, she broke the quiet. Do you ever think about how far we've come? She asked, her voice tinged with awe. All the time, Elijah replied, smiling. It's hard to believe it all started with a fall. She laughed softly, leaning into him. Maybe that fall wasn't an accident. Maybe it was meant to bring us together. Elijah wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. If it was, I'm glad it happened, because I can't imagine my life without you. Or this. They stayed there until the stars began to twinkle in the darkening sky. As they descended the mountain hand in hand, they knew their journey was far from over. Together they had built something extraordinary. a legacy rooted in compassion, resilience, and love. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as one, united by their shared vision for a better world. And as they drove away from Pine Ridge, the headlights cutting through the darkness, neither could shake the feeling that this was just the beginning.